Yes!
So, you want to start raiding and getting into the PvE endgame, but your weapons suck or you don't know which weapons are worth using or going for. Maybe you're a solo player and your success with LFG has been terrible and it's been a nightmare because not many raid teams are kind or patient enough to teach somebody with a lacking loadout. Well, I got some news for you. I put together a list of legendary weapons that'll make you very successful in even the most difficult parts of the PvE endgame, and not just raids. And you want to know the best part? All of these weapons are obtainable solo. Yeah, you heard me. And you won't have to step into a single difficult activity to obtain them. Yeah, that applies to raids as well. Now, if you listen to all the advice I have to offer here, you'll become one step closer to becoming raid ready without raiding. One thing you will need to know is that adhering to one loadout is a horrible habit to have. All in-game PvE activities are different and will require you to switch your weapons and armor up to achieve maximum viability and contribution to the fire team, especially when it comes to raids, because you'll be expected to change around your gear for every encounter if need be. You absolutely need to give yourself options, and I've compiled a list of some of the most viable legendary weapons that are put in work in the PvE endgame. When it comes to primary weapons, you can use whatever you want for the most part, because unlike Destiny 1, all primary weapons for the most part have a fighting chance in PvE, and using whatever you're most comfortable with is the best advice I can give you. Your primary weapon is the workhorse of your loadout and will be mostly used to dispatch rank and file enemies. Primary weapons don't fulfill a DPS role because that's what you have your super, special weapons, and heavy weapons for. So yeah, if you have a favorite pulse rifle, use it. If you like to use sidearms or auto rifles, use those too. Use whatever you enjoy using, but I highly suggest against using two primary weapons. If that's what you like doing, go ahead, but believe me when I say that your fire team members will more than likely get annoyed if you're not able to kill ads quickly enough, for example. Now, there are several inconveniences you'll run into while using a double primary loadout, so I suggest using a primary weapon and a special weapon. Special weapons were designed to take down stronger opponents and will have an easier time dealing with enemies that would take your primary weapon too long to get rid of. Now, it doesn't matter if your primary is in an energy slot or if your special weapon is in a kinetic slot or vice versa either. But yeah, let's take a look at some of the most viable legendary weapons that you will have the most success with in the PvE endgame. Ever since Season 5, new, fully masterwork legendary weapons with static perks will be introduced into the game. There was one for Crucible, one for Vanguard, and one for Gambit, and this trend continued from Seasons 5 to 7. These weapons were known as Pinnacle weapons. Starting in Season 8, Pinnacle weapons were discontinued entirely and were replaced by Ritual weapons. We were given 3 Ritual weapons during Seasons 8 and 9, but for Season 10, we were given a single weapon known as the Point of the Staff from Iron Banner. Starting in Season 12, there will be one brand new Ritual weapon introduced, and at first I had very low expectations for these weapons until I actually used them myself. At the time this video is going live, we currently have Season 12's Adore Sniper Rifle, Season 13's Salvager Salvo Breech Loaded Grenade Launcher, and Season 14's Rapid Fire Frame Fusion Rifle, Null Composure. I can only speak on the 3 pursuit weapons that we currently have, so if you're watching this video after Season 14, take this as a preemptive recommendation to add any of the new Ritual weapons released after the season that this video came out in, because I'm pretty sure they'll be amazing as well. Now, similarly to Ritual weapons, pursuit weapons have 4 trait perks that can be switched around to your liking. Adored is great because it has the perk known as Vorpal Weapon, one of the most sought after perks for boss damage, because it increases weapon damage by about 15%. If you decide to use Adored against bosses, I recommend equipping it with a boss spec mod to increase its damage dealt to bosses by another 7%. I don't ever suggest using sniper rifles against bosses unless the boss is stationary and or has a big crit spot, because missing shots is one of the most likely occurrences when using a sniper rifle for boss damage. Salvager Salvo quickly became one of my favorite special weapons in the game. As of presently, it's the only breech loaded grenade launcher that has the chain reaction perk. And as the name of this perk entails, enemies defeated by Salvager Salvo's munitions will explode and chain arc damage to nearby enemies. Salvager Salvo is one of the best ad clearing special weapons in the game, and its ambitious assassin perk will load a second grenade into the magazine after every kill. And it ain't too shabby against bosses either. This grenade launcher has a spike grenades perk, a perk that increases damage of grenades that strike opponents directly. This perk provides a 15% damage increase, but again, the damage bonus only happens when the grenades hit the target dead on. Null Composure completely surprised me when I found out how powerful it is. First off, this is a rapid fire frame fusion rifle, an archetype that nobody knew the potential of until Null Composure came out in Season 14. This weapon comes with Feeding Frenzy, a perk that grants reload speed bonuses based on the number of enemies defeated before reloading, and maxes out at 5 stacks, so after killing 5 enemies with this weapon, it will reload lightning fast. It also has Reservoir Burst, which works very similarly to Chain Reaction, but only works when Null Composure's magazine is full. Now, if you decide to use this weapon against bosses, you'll want to swap from Reservoir Burst to High Impact Reserves for some extra damage. Ever since they were buffed in PvE some time ago, Slug Shotguns have become one of the most popular weapon archetypes to use against bosses. As of presently, the only Slug Shotguns obtainable outside of raids consists of the Blasphemer, Bone Chiller, Sojourner's Tale, and the First In Last Out. All of these weapons are solid options, but unfortunately Blasphemer is the only one of the 4 that can't roll auto-loading holster. So during boss damage phases, you'll have to manually reload it unless you're playing as a hunter, whereas you will be able to dodge the reload instead. You'll commonly see many people running a Slug Shotgun in the kinetic slot and in the energy slot and rapidly swapping between them during boss damage phases. This technique is known as quick swapping, and it's rumored that this exploit might be patched sometime soon, so there's some likelihood that it'll no longer be possible by the time you're watching this video. Oh, and one more thing before I move on. You have to own the Shadowkeep expansion in order to obtain Blasphemer, Beyond Light to obtain Bone Chiller, and the Season 14 pass for Sojourner's Tale. Luckily, the best shotgun of these 4, First In Last Out, is available to all players despite if you own any of the DLC or not. Now, every time I've obtained this weapon, it was either from the gunsmith or various other random drops. In Season 14, we were given a breech-loaded grenade launcher that sits in a kinetic slot known as the Ignition Code. Now, you will need the Season 14 pass to obtain this weapon, and as of presently, it's the only breech-loaded grenade launcher capable of rolling slide shot. Now, if you weren't already aware, slide shot partially reloads a weapon's magazine after sliding, but has a cooldown of about 2 seconds or so. I'm not sure, but it isn't possible to repeatedly slide to reload. However, since Ignition Code can only have 1 round in its magazine at a time, it'll always fully reload after sliding, and there's no cooldown for it. So if you have an Ignition Code with slide shot, you would literally never have to manually reload. It can also roll Vorpal Weapon in the second slot, so this is the perk combination I would recommend if you ever decide to go for an Ignition Code. I imagine that we'll get other breech-loaded grenade launchers with slide shot in their perk pool as well, so if this ends up happening, I would recommend that weapon or those weapons as well. The heavy slot is home to your hardest hitting weapons. The weapons located here will be your main damage dealers against bosses, and it's important to mention that the majority of the time, it'll be an exotic weapon that you will be using for the most adequate boss DPS. But there's a handful of legendary weapons I have in mind that'll get the job done without an issue. Now, whether you're using one of the weapons I suggested or not, make sure that all of your weapons in this slot are equipped with either a major or boss spec mod depending on the activity. Every little bit of damage matters, and you don't want to miss out on any damage at all, even if it's a 7-something% increase. I find myself using grenade launchers from the rapid fire frame archetype quite frequently. I enjoy this grenade launcher archetype the most because it has the fastest fire rate of all legendary grenade launchers at 150 RPM. This enables them to unload their entire magazine in the blink of an eye, and via its rapid fire frame intrinsic perk, your weapon will reload faster when the magazine is empty. As of presently, there are a total of 3 rapid fire frame grenade launchers capable of random rolls and aren't sunset. My personal favorite, the Outrageous Fortune, Behringer's Memory, and the Iron Banner Swarm of the Raven. Outrageous Fortune and Behringer's Memory drop randomly from the general loot pool, meaning that any instance where you would receive a random legendary reward, is always possible that one of these weapons can drop at that point in time. A Swarm of the Raven was reissued in the game during Season 11, but I'm not entirely sure if it's still available. For one, I don't play Iron Banner much, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't even be able to attain a Swarm of the Raven because the Iron Banner loot pool is so huge. Targeting one weapon from the entire Iron Banner loot pool is a very unfun experience. So if anybody watching this video can confirm that Swarm is still dropping, please let me know in the comment section. When it comes to grenade launchers, there are only 3 things that really matter. Number 1, spike grenades. Number 2, high velocity. Number 3, auto-loading holster, if possible. Wait, no, it's 4 things. And number 4, low blast radius. I'll explain. I spoke on spike grenades earlier when I brought up the Salvager Salvo, and things are exactly the same here with the heavy grenade launchers. That 15% extra damage will make a huge difference. So if you obtain one of these grenade launchers without spike grenades, save yourself the time and just dismantle it and go for a new one. You'll want high velocity because grenade launcher projectiles have travel time, and more velocity equals faster travel time. Honestly, if your grenade launcher of choice doesn't have a high velocity stat, it isn't a deal breaker, so don't worry about it too much. I recommend it to keep your grenade launcher's blast radius lower because a low blast radius stat means that your weapon's damage will be prioritized by its projectiles instead of the explosions. You want the projectiles to be dealing the most damage, not the explosions, because if not, then you aren't taking full advantage of spike grenades. And you'll want the auto-loading holster perk for the most obvious reasons. During damage phases, you'll empty out the entire magazine of your weapon, switch over to your special weapon, cast your super or something else, then you will switch back to your heavy weapon and repeat the process. Auto-loading holster reloads your weapon when stowed, and it only takes about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds to proc. Even with the increased reload speed from the rapid fire frame intrinsic perk, manually reloading is always less ideal than automatically reloading in every scenario. Oh, and if you obtain a grenade launcher with all of the most ideal perks, masterwork and all, and it doesn't have auto-loading holster, I would still suggest keeping it. I had an amazingly rolled Outrageous Fortune that didn't have auto-loading holster and it performed just fine. Of course, I ended up replacing it the moment that I got one with auto-loading holster though. This perk is present in the first trait slot of Swarm of the Raven and Outrageous Fortune, but it's present in the second trait slot of Behringer's Memory. However, Behringer's Memory has access to Pulse Monitor in its first slot. Without knowing the capabilities of this perk, you would probably overlook it, but I want to let you in on the secret. In certain scenarios, this perk provides better automatic reloading capabilities than auto-loading holster itself. I'll explain. So Pulse Monitor states that it'll reload your weapon from the reserves when the user hits critical health, right? Well, there's a little trick you can do. If you're within the confines of a Well of Radiance during a boss DPS phase, and let's be real, 99% of the time you will be, you'll want to fire the last round in Behringer's Memories magazine at your feet to damage yourself. In almost every instance where I've done this, my health would drop to red and Pulse Monitor would proc and reload my weapon for me. And the healing capabilities of Well of Radiance activate quickly, so you don't have to worry about dying. So if you're able to get into the rhythm of dumping a few rounds into the boss, then firing the final round at your feet, you will never have to worry about reloading. Everybody should have a sword in their loadout. And when it comes to legendary swords, the Void Damage Vortex Frame Sword, known as Fallen Guillotine, will be more than worth your time. This weapon is a part of the general loot pool and can drop from any source where random legendary gear can drop. When this sword stepped onto the scene back in season 11, it was all the rage because of how powerful it was. Now, some time ago it received a nerf to reduce its damage output, but it's still very strong post nerf. Vortex Frame Swords are special because their heavy attack is a whirlwind slash. Now this attack is more powerful if executed while your sword energy is full, and if executed while the sword's energy meter is still charging, the vortex will be less apparent, indicating the loss of damage. For the best results damage wise, you'll want the following perks. For the Blaze column, Jagged Edge is usually the most recommended because it provides the best damage output. However, your sword ammo is cut by around 20 if you choose this route. The second best option will be Honed Edge. Honed Edge provides half of the extra damage that Jagged Edge would inflict without the ammo reduction penalty. I honestly don't believe that the guard column matters too much, but I personally went with Swordmaster's Guard for the faster sword meter charge rate. But if I'm being honest, the perks that matter the most are the trait perks. And for the best possible results, you'll want Relentless Strikes in the first trait slot and Whirlwind Blade in the second trait slot. Relentless Strikes grants a small amount of ammo after 3 consecutive light attacks. And finally, Whirlwind Blade. Rapid sword strikes increase this weapon's damage for a short duration. This perk stacks up to 5 times, and the damage increases by 6% for each subsequent sword strike, 12% for the second strike, 18% for the third, 24% for the fourth, and 30% for the fifth and final strike. The stacks will disappear when you stop dealing damage with a sword or if you guard. Now I wanted to mention that Eternity's Edge is also a Vortex Frame Sword as well, but it doesn't have half of the potential that Fallen Guillotine does if I'm being honest. First off, it can only be wielded by Warlocks and its perk pool is very, very shallow. And Whirlwind Blade, the most viable damage perk for swords, isn't accessible on Eternity's Edge. Eternity's Edge is a solid weapon as a whole, but if you look at its perk pool, it wasn't made for DPS at all. Linear Fusion Rifles received a 15% damage buff in Season 14, so now is the perfect time to get your hands on one. Unfortunately, the only linear fusion rifle in the game that has any real potential as a reliable damage dealer will be Season 13's Threaded Needle. There's no need to go over the barrel and battery perks because they matter a lot less and won't make the worlds of difference in your damage output. However, I would say the Accelerated Coils is the best battery. You lose some impact, but the increased rate of fire ends up equating to more DPS in the long run. Also, Enhanced Battery is a waste of a perk for linear fusion rifles because it doesn't increase the weapon's magazine size, and the same also applies to backup mats. So just do yourself a favor and don't use Enhanced Battery on this weapon. In the first trait slot, you'll want either Clown Cartridge, Rapid Hit, Auto-Loading Holster, or Field Prep. Clown Cartridge will always grant at least 2 rounds to the magazine every time you reload. Now, there are times when this perk will grant 3 or 4 extra rounds as well, so your total magazine size will never be lower than 6 and never higher than 8. I would have to say that Clown Cartridge is the best option for the first trait slot. Rapid Hit is a solid option since it increases reload speed and stability every time you crit, but your DPS will take a hit if you miss just 1 crit shot. Because if this happens, you'll lose all your rapid hit stacks and you'll end up having to manually reload. You already know what auto-loading holster does, but the second best perk in the first column will have to be Field Prep. Field Prep increases ammo reserves, but also grants a huge speed bonus to reloading, stowing, and readying this weapon. In the second trait slot, there's only 2 perks here that matter: Vorpal Weapon and Frenzy. Vorpal Weapon deals 15% extra damage to bosses and vehicles, while Frenzy receives a flat damage bonus of 20%, as well as an increase to reload speed and handling. This perk won't kick in until 12 seconds after you've taken damage or dealt damage to an enemy, and the weapon that has the frenzy perk can be stowed and the perk will still proc. For example, you could deal damage with another weapon, and if 12 seconds have passed, switch to the weapon with the frenzy perk and the buff will be active. However, the frenzy buff will disappear if you go longer than 5 seconds without taking or dealing damage, so keep that in mind. And as you can see, this weapon is armed to the teeth with viable perks that enables it to put in some serious work. I imagine that Bungie will introduce more linear fusion rifles later on in the game since they were buffed, but at this very moment, Threaded Needle is in a league of its own. You can obtain Threaded Needle from focused Umbral engrams from Season of the Chosen, but as of presently, it isn't known how this weapon will be obtainable after Season of the Chosen content has been removed from the game. I would suggest using Threaded Needle's perks as reference for what you should want on a linear fusion rifle if more linear fusion rifles have been introduced into the game at the time you're watching this video. Well, that does it for this one, everybody. I really hope that you found this video useful. Legendary weapons will be the most commonly occurring weapons in your loadout. Since their perks are always random, the possibilities of perk combinations are endless. I didn't have any particular recommendations for primary weapons for this exact reason, and because I might enjoy using something that you might not be too fond of. Now that you've gotten a little bit more information, you're officially one step closer to becoming raid ready without raiding. But yeah, if you made it to the end of this video and enjoyed what you watched, do me a favor and thumb press to that like button until it turns blue. And if you're new to my neck of the woods, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon so you don't ever miss a video of the most elite gaming content. But with that being stated, 1LHD is over and out. Y'all take it easy.
Can redeem you and me. Don't you wanna feel something? And oh, I miss loving you, but I need to live my own truth. I wanna feel it all brand new. I found a little something from Miss Angelou. Take the good and hold it near to you, and let go of all that burdens you.